You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.
I am Tracy Murda, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the Good Night Sleep Project podcast. I am your host, Tracy Murda, and today I have an extraordinary guest, sleep psychologist and assistant professor of clinical psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine for sleep medicine, Lynelle Schneeberg. Welcome, Lynelle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
We have a lot to talk about today in terms of just sleep in general, I think, from adults to children. I have some personal sleep monsters that I'm going to have you tackle. And in addition to that, I want to talk about the new book that you have out that is specifically geared toward these children with sleep problems and their parents who are slowly dying inside. So, Lynelle, why don't you tell me a little bit about your book first, and then we'll hop into, some of the real meat of what you're doing to solve it.
Sure, I would be happy to. So I will first tell you that I wear two hats. One hat is as a sleep psychologist at the Yale School of Medicine, where I treat adults with insomnia. And the other half of the week, I work at Connecticut Children's Medical Center, where I help families learn how to help their kids become great sleepers. So the book came about because week after week at Connecticut Children's, I was writing up these plans to help parents teach their kids to be great sleepers. And I just began to notice that I was using the same 5 steps and that the plans were really similar. And I thought to myself, there has to be a book in here. And I could definitely teach parents how to do this just by reading a book. And so that's how the book came to be.
So tell me a little bit more about your background. I mean, you've interviewed with us before, and we talked about adult sleep issues and things like that.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about kind of what brought you into focusing a little bit more on children as well.
Sure. Yes. So I started out when I was getting my graduate degree in psychology, realizing that I really loved the intersection of psychology and medicine, and that intersection has a name. It's called behavioral medicine or psychological medicine. And it's this really great area because you're working as a psychologist with someone who is dealing with some sort of medical issue and then helping them solve that with some psychological methods. So, for example, with insomnia, I talked before on the podcast of how to use cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia to help that problem improve significantly. And with children, there are a couple of things that parents tend to do. I always say they're doing them with the right intentions, but they have the sort of the wrong outcome, if you're with me. And I wrote my book to help parents figure out what they might be doing wrong, what 2 mistakes they might be making at bedtime, and how to fix those. And when you do that, your children often become much more wonderful sleepers.
Interesting. So comparing adults to children in terms of sleep problems, are the problems the same? Are the level of issue the same? And, as far as your approach to solving those things, could those also be the same?
Yes, that's a great question. So I always think of sleep medicine as being divided into 2 areas. One would be sort of more the insomnia kinds of issues, which of course both adults have and children have. And then the other side of sleep medicine would be what would be called more medical issues or organic issues, some people call them. And those would be things like sleep apnea, narcolepsy, restless legs, circadian rhythm problems. And children can have all of the same sleep problems that adults have, but by far the most common sleep problem that children have is called childhood. It's actually, I'm going to stop for a second. By far, the most common problem that children have is called behavioral insomnia of childhood. And that just means that they've learned some ways to fall asleep that aren't really the most ideal ways. And you can help them learn how to fall asleep a new way. But of course, with children, I'm actually working with their parents. So I teach their parents how to make those changes, and then the children sleep better as a result.
Hallelujah. What age of children do you tend to focus on or see the most of with these sleep issues?
Yes. So we see children from 6 months and up, really all the way through into their early 20s. So very young babies, they might have, again, trouble self-soothing or getting themselves to sleep. And then the age that I'm focusing on in my book is preschool and elementary school children who really can't fall asleep very easily without some help from a parent. And then you would move into teenagers who often have difficulty falling asleep at the right time in order to get up for school. And then in the late 20s and early teens, you might start seeing things like narcolepsy or even some of those more adult sleep disorders that we talked about, sleep apnea and so on. Although, of course, the child can have sleep apnea at a young age as well. But those are the typical problems that would come at each age range.
Oh, I have so many questions for you. I'm shocked that you said 6 months. That seems really young everyone just kind of accepts that I've got a baby, they sleep poorly. The whole sleeping like a baby thing, I think, is just complete nonsense.
You're right.
But what about children? Like, for example, I'll talk about my little first monster here. She was the most amazing sleeper from start till about 6 months ago. So she's almost 2 now. And she slept wonderfully. And now it's like takes too long to go to sleep. And then when she does sleep, she's waking up. She's absolutely psychotic when she wakes up. And then she can go all night without sleep. It's just like insane to me. And, where do those things come from?
Yeah. So it started when she was 18 months-ish, right?
Roughly about then. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And is she still sleeping in a crib?
No, she actually transitioned to her bed pretty early.
Yeah. Maybe right around that time or not?
Yeah, probably. Well,
mark.
She slept pretty well in her bed probably for the first 3 months or so.
Mm-hmm. And then what happened at around 18 months? She would need you to stay with her until she fell asleep more often?
Yeah. I credit my husband with that idea.
Of course, it's his fault.
So we started, sleep, or at least laying on her floor until she falls asleep, and she would fall asleep relatively quickly, and then it just kind of got longer and longer to put her to bed. And then all of a sudden, this 2 a.m. like clockwork, she wakes up and she is either screaming and fighting and wanting to, combat with us, or she just is awake and is like, let's party. Like, she just doesn't want to sleep.
Yes. Okay. Sure. So I will ask the medical question first. Does she have any problems with her breathing at night, snoring or gasping, or anything that makes you worried about her airway, so to speak?
Not that I've noticed. And I'll be honest, ever since I started doing this sleep work with Richard, I have obviously become hypersensitive to those things. And I'm like, breathing with her mouth open. Is she a mouth breather? All those things. And there's nothing that I've noticed that, scares people safe.
Yeah. So unlikely that it's that. So I think what happened is something that's much more typical, much more common. So there was some time when she was younger and she was in the bed and someone would lie on the floor. And the way that a child falls asleep at bedtime is the way that they want things to be when they wake up in the middle of the night. So if your husband were to stay with her and maybe they do some chatting, or maybe he sings, it doesn't sound like it, but maybe he might rub her back, or he might tell her one more story, or she might be chatting with him. So if your husband is present or you are present when she's falling asleep, that's sometimes people call that a sleep crutch. The formal name of it is called a sleep onset association, just like Pavlov. Remember Pavlov?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So he rang the bell and fed the dog until pretty much the dog would learn, I'm going to salivate when I even hear a bell, right? Because that means dinner's coming. So for your daughter, falling asleep, having a parent nearby, those are now very linked or very associated. And then, of course, your husband leaves after the job is done, right? After she's asleep. And then she wakes up in the middle of the night and says, hey, where's this guy? that I'm so used to falling asleep, with him nearby.
Mhm.
And then I'm certain she protests in some manner, um, coming to find you or calling out for someone to come. And then it usually probably takes a parent, again, some assistance, right, to get her back to
Right.
sleep. Yeah.
If she goes back to sleep, right.
If she goes back to sleep, right. So if she were to be up for a while, then would she eventually fall back to sleep and sleep in for a while after that?
No, she's just like
Up.
wired and awake. I mean, there's two different types that we get. It's either she wakes up, and of course, I'm the panicked parent who's like, she must be having night terrors. I want,
Yes,
which
right.
I
Of
hear
course.
we probably label it more than it is, but that seems to be, she's almost not quite with it in when she's fighting
Yes,
us,
that's common.
or she just
Yeah,
wakes up and she wants to party.
got it. And then, so tell me what time she falls asleep
She probably falls
at
asleep
night.
about 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Okay.
I mean,
And
we
if
put her
everything
down
were
well before that, but she takes that long. to
takes
get
a
to
long
sleep.
time, sure, yeah. And then when on a not, a night that's not terrible, when would she get up in the morning?
Probably about 6 o'clock.
Okay, so she's sort of like an 8:30 to 6 o'clock sleeper on a good night.
On a very rare good night, yes, that's what it used
Yeah,
to
very,
be.
very good night. Used to be. Okay. And then would she nap as well?
She does take a nap at daycare.
Okay. And does she nap a couple of hours there?
She naps about at least an hour, usually around 1 o'clock.
Sure. And then on a weekend, would she try to avoid naps at your home?
Not really. We were pretty consistent about keeping it, at least making sure she laid down. And she, up
Good.
until recently, was really good about it.
Great. And would anybody have to be in her room when she took a
Oh,
nap on the weekend? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she definitely likes someone to be around. If you were to, I'm not saying that you do this, but if you were to catch her really quick and put her in your bed in the middle of the night, would she go back to sleep and sleep pretty well?
I think she would want to play. Like, that would be her go-to.
Got it. She would still rather play.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then in the daytime, does she seem to have plenty of energy, or does she seem like she's a little short?
Yeah. Nope.
Yeah. And not cranky. Is she cranky or not so cranky?
She's kind of cranky all the time.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll tell you what I would do if you would come to see me in the sleep center. I would have you start to help her learn how to self-soothe at bedtime.
Okay.
And I would have you try to help her set up her bedroom so that it seemed exactly the same in the middle of the night as it did when she fell asleep. So here's how I might go about that.
Okay.
I would want to know about your bedtime routine, sort of what you do and in what order. Would you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, she eats her dinner around 5:36, and then maybe a little snack or something in between. She's usually playing with her older sister, right up to about bedtime. She's usually actually pretty good when we say, Landon, it's bedtime. She'll grab her stuff and she heads, down the hall, and she'll walk herself into bed.
Terrific.
And then she'll crawl in bed. She's like, pretends like she's actually gonna do it.
And then what happens?
That's about it. And then I usually lay down on the floor, or my husband will lay on the floor, and we'll just lay there. And he seems very calm. And then it's like, as time goes on, she's just like, she likes to mess with you. She'll come and peek over the end of the bed, and it's cute. And try not to with her, but it just takes. And there's usually a lot of get back in bed.
Sure. That's very classic. And then would she ever run out of the room and make a game out of that? Or would she ever go to say, oh, now I want Daddy to come give me a kiss? Any of that sort of thing?
No, she'll just try and get out of bed to get things to put in her bed with her for fun. Diapers, shoes, whatever it is.
Right, whatever it is. Right. And then it's a little bit of a game of get back in bed. Yeah, got it. Okay. All right. So I think what I might suggest be that I have in my book, I have a bedtime routine. I call it the 5 Bs, the 5B bedtime routine. And I think you're doing most of it, but I'm just going to run through. So the first B in my book is bedtime bite, which is that snack that you mentioned. And then bath or washing up if it's not a full-blown bath night, right? Every night's not a bath night necessarily. And then brush teeth, bathroom, the final bathroom trip. And then I do love it if parents get into the bed with the child. She sounds like, does she have a twin-size bed?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So you'd have a little reading light on the side of the bed, and you would leave the overhead lights on for this part, and the little reading light also. And then you or your husband, whoever's I call it the parent on duty, would read. And I have people read a very specific number of books so that that's not a negotiation.
Aha.
So 2 books. We read 2 books every night. Her name is Landon, right?
Yeah.
Yes. You say, Landon,
Yeah.
go pick out your 2 books and go pick out whoever you want to have in the bed tonight, whether it's puppy or giraffe or whoever it might be. And then the parent on duty would read the 2 books. And then I'm going to say something that you're going to think is a little bit counterintuitive. I would have you put a chair in the doorway, and I would have you have the back of the chair facing the room. So you would be facing out into the door, into the hallway.
Okay.
Yep. And then you would turn off all the lights in the room, except you would leave that little reading light on.
Okay.
Yep. And then Landon would have her stuffed animals. Maybe she has a picture book. You said she gets all sorts of random things and puts them in the bed.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would try very hard, and it's going to be hard, but I would try this. Until she's asleep, I would try completely ignoring what she does, completely ignoring it, because I imagine she can get up and down from the bed herself.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And I would just say, Landon, I'm on mom time now, if it's you. And I would be sitting in the chair looking very busy, right? With you could have your laptop, you could have your tablet, you could have your book, you could listen to a podcast, and you would say, Landon, what I'm going to do from now on is I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I am going to sit in the doorway here because you're used to having me nearby, but I'm on my time now and I have some things I want to do. You can play until you're drowsy enough to fall asleep.
Okay.
Now, she's going to think she hit the jackpot, right?
Yeah.
She's definitely going to think she hit the jackpot. But I guarantee you that the interesting part of this whole thing for her is you all reacting to what she does.
Oh, sure.
The peeking over the end of the bed, the telling her to get back, the saying, what are you doing up? Why do you need a diaper in your bed? Why are you getting your tennis shoes? That's interesting part. And if you're sitting in the doorway with your back to her, looking very engaged in your own thing, everything she's doing to get your attention is going to become just not fun at all.
Boring. Right.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So your job is just to sit in the doorway. Your only job is to make sure she doesn't leave the room.
Right.
And then you can say something that's, again, going to sound a little bit counterintuitive or paradoxical. You're going to say, Landon, just play until you're sleepy. And then she might say all sorts of.
That's great.
Yeah. She might say all sorts of things, She might try to tell you the most interesting story or tell you something funny or ask you to come lay on the floor. She's going to have a lot to say. And your job, if you can manage it, is just to say the same thing back to her. I'm going to sit here and do my thing. You can play until you're sleepy. And I call that the broken record.
I like it.
Yeah. So you're sort of flipping the game on her. You're basically saying your only job is to be in your room and get in your own bed when you're drowsy. My job is to sit here and do my own thing because really I'm on my time now. And then later, of course, I'm going to move you farther and farther away. But that's a big flip for her. That's going to be a big change. Yep. So it's a good start. And she will be awake a frighteningly long time. The first
she already is anyway.
few nights. Yes, she already is anyway. So again, she may also up the ante on you. And she may cry, or she may say, I can't do it. Or she may say, you've got to come lay with me. Or she may say any of those things. But you could say, oh, wow, you're such a big girl. You can put yourself to sleep now, but I'm going to be sitting right here. But again, try not to answer every single question. Try not to change what you say. You can explain all this in the daytime. Once you're sitting in the chair, try to imagine that you want the same sentence to come out over and over again. That's okay. Whatever she gives you, right? Whatever sentence she says to you, you can always say, oh, that's okay. Play till you're sleepy. I like it the old way, Mommy. Oh, that's okay. Play till you're sleepy. My feet feel weird. That's okay. Play till you're sleepy. My tennis shoe is in the basement. I don't know what she'll say. My giraffe is in the basement. And then you can say, that's okay. You have puppy. Play till you're sleepy.
Okay.
And
what
she'll
is
be
your take
super
on
creative. I'm sorry. Yeah, go
I've
ahead.
heard, conflicting things there as far as sleep professionals go in terms of recommending. I know a lot of parents do if they come out crying or if they come, they won't physically putting them back in the bed over and over and over and over again. Is that similar? Is that, should be avoided? What is your take on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So my take on it, this is a perfect segue into the other piece, which is called a bedtime ticket. Have you heard that term before?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. So a bedtime ticket is a little ticket that you would give Landon. You'd give her 2 of them, and you can decorate them and make them in the daytime. You can make them out of index cards, glitter, you name it. And then when you're all finished with the 2 books, you would give her the 2 tickets. And she's 2. I guarantee you, if she knows how to trade you for something, she knows how to use a ticket.
Sure.
So it's yeah, right. So she can follow a command. She knows how to use a ticket. So you would give her the 2 tickets and you'd say, "Good night, darling. I'm going to go sit in the chair now," like we talked about. If you need anything else, you need to bring me a ticket for it. And then you would sit in the chair and do your thing. And she would say whatever she might say. What are some common things she might say?
And she's not talking in full sentences yet, but it's either
Words.
I want something to eat or something to drink,
Yeah.
or just attention. It's just she just wants the attention.
Perfect. Yeah. So let's say she wanted something to eat. I wouldn't do that. I would say we already had our snack, right? Because that's the very first B in my plan for a reason, right? Because kids love to tell you an hour later that they're hungry, an hour into the thing, right? That they're hungry. So you can always say, "Oh, we already had our snack, remember?" And then if she said, "Oh, I need more water in my cup," you could say, "Oh, sure, I need a ticket for that, Landon." And then you would go get the ticket. You would take the water cup, fill it up, happy as you please, bring it back, and sit right back down in the chair. And then if she said, "Oh, I have something so funny to tell you," I know she's speaking in sentences, but let's say she said, "Fix my covers." You would say, "Sure, I need a ticket for that, Landon." And you would take the ticket and fix her covers beautifully. And then you would say, "Remember, Landon, your tickets are gone. Now, play till you're sleepy." And then you would go right back to the chair.
Back to the
and then, anything after that, you would just say, "Your tickets are gone. Play till you're sleepy." Now, to swing back to should you put them back to bed. If she comes out of her bed and says, "Mommy, tuck me in again," and she still has a ticket left, great, do it. Take the ticket, give her the best tuck ever, and go right back to your chair. Otherwise, the getting out of bed, being put back, getting out of bed, being put back, that becomes a game also, right? Engages you, gets your attention on her again. So I really wouldn't do it unless she has a ticket to spare.
Sure. Okay, that makes perfect sense. That's exactly what she wants. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me about your experience, and I'm curious about this. I've done some research on my own with, as I mentioned, the night terrors are waking up really aggressive.
Yes.
Is that common in kids? Is it
very common?
Really always a night terror? I mean, I think we all like to jump to the worst conclusion.
Yes, you're so right. So night terrors are absolutely developmentally appropriate. All children have them. They peak at age 3.5. Children will not remember them in the morning. They are not really awake. And your only job as a parent is to try not to freak out because they look so sad and so scary, and to keep them safe. That's it.
Okay.
They're just like a little lightning storm in the brain is how you could think of them. They're, again, completely normal, and you really shouldn't wake a child who's having one. I know sometimes Landon is like sort of stuck between wake and sleep. That's actually called a confusional arousal. That means that she's a little confused. She's an arousal, sort of like an awakening, right? So she's sort of awake, sort of asleep, not very happy. It's hard to get her what she wants. It's hard for her to say what she wants.
Right.
You sort of have to push your way through that one too. Now, having said that, she'll have fewer of them when she can put herself to sleep completely. Because if you woke up and your pillow and your blankets were gone, which is what it feels like to her when her parent is gone, you would think, what the heck? What the heck happened to my pillow? And you would have a little bit of a hard time finding it or figuring out why it was gone. That's sort of a way to explain what she's experiencing.
That makes perfect sense.
Doesn't it?
Yes. Oh my
Doesn't
gosh,
it?
that's like a light bulb just went off. I'm like, it.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Oh my gosh.
That's it.
Wow.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So
and
for other kids,
terrors,
not just mine, but what's the difference between then a nightmare and a night terror and the confusional sleep? Because it seems like different children have kind of a different rate.
You're so right. And that's another great question. So a nightmare and a night terror, they're easier to distinguish like this. A night terror would usually happen in the first part of the night because they're not actually arising out of dream sleep, which is called REM sleep, REM sleep. They're arising out of what's called non-REM sleep or deeper sleep. And the differences would be that the child doesn't really seem with it. The child won't remember it in the morning. It looks really scary to the parent, like that. A nightmare would normally happen in the second half of the night when we have most of our dream sleep. They would wake up fully after it. They would remember it. They would be able to report all sorts of details about it, and so on.
Okay, that is, yes. I think it sounds like so many people kind of overgeneralize everything and just throw it into the night terror.
They do. And last thing I want to say about night terrors or nightmares is they are not a sign that your child has some disturbance or psychological problem. These are all really, really normal. Really, really normal. If you think about it, I'm sure that you had nightmares when you were a little child.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, everyone has them.
We still do,
People still do have them. You might watch a scary movie or have a scare with, a near miss in your car or something like that. And then you might have a nightmare that night.
I'm going to
There's
ask
one
you about
other.
this. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. There's one other trick that I want to tell you about for night terrors. If it's true for your child that your child has this event, let's call it, at about the same time every night, 11 o'clock, let's say, 11 p.m. There's a trick called scheduled awakenings, and that means that you could go in 15 minutes before 11 and very, very quietly call Landon's name until she just barely responded, fluttered her eyelids or turned over, and then say, "Oh, that's okay, sweetie, go back to sleep." And that's called a scheduled awakening. And sometimes that'll do a little reset. Nobody's even sure why. It'll do a little reset, and then Landon will not have one that night.
That was exactly what I was just going to ask you about.
Yes.
I just saw something on it yesterday. I'd never heard of it, and I thought, that sounds pretty dicey to wake a sleeping baby.
You barely. It would be almost if you ask your husband to turn over when he was snoring.
Sure.
Barely wake
Like
them.
okay, I'm back to sleep.
Yes, but I wouldn't choose that option until I had worked really hard on teaching the child to fall asleep independently at bedtime.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Because
I'm
that
so
could take
excited
care
to
of it.
try this.
Yeah, that could take care of it on its own,
I had a feeling that all of this was somehow related to her, being pretty dependent on us and something. I just had a feeling that it was something, yes, she had consistency, but it was the wrong kind of consistency,
It's just a little too much help. Yeah, it's just a little too much help. And you're in very good company, may I say. And that's the reason that I wrote my book, because everywhere I go in my life, people will say, "Oh my gosh, I think I'm doing everything right, but my child wakes up all the time. How does she falls asleep pretty well, but she wakes up a lot, and she seems upset when she wakes up." That's why I wrote my book, because these problems are so very common, and people just don't quite know how to fix them.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about how your actual ages in the book that you're addressing here. But before I do, I'm just curious, because I'm kind of past the stage, hopefully. But for anyone else, what is your take on the cry it out method? If your child, baby, whatever it is just cannot get to sleep, and they are just, adamant, just they're crying. Do you let them self-soothe? Do you go in and, go in shorter periods of time each night, change it up? I've heard so many things that everyone seems to have a different take on it.
Yeah, they do. You're right. If you scour the dark corners of the internet, you will find lots of conflicting advice. That is for sure. So here's my take. If I had a magic wand, I would try to teach parents from a very early age to do a little pattern with babies that a lot of people refer to as eat, play, sleep. And what that means is every time a baby woke up, you would feed them immediately after waking, and then you would play with them or let them have wake time or tummy time or whatever you want to call that, depending on their age. And then when they got fussy or tired or showed those little signs that babies show when they're sleepy, you would put them back to sleep without feeding them again, actually. And then you would do that again. When they woke up from that nap or sleep period, you would feed them, let them play some more, and put them back to sleep. If you do that pattern, your baby will never develop what's called a feeding to sleep association, meaning that they only learn how to fall asleep with a bottle or a breast. And that's what leads, right? That's what leads to the issue of a child not being able to self-soothe. They've always been soothed to sleep with food.
Mm-hmm.
So if you, from an early age, tried to have that be the cycle, eat, play, sleep, you would have a baby who very naturally learns to self-soothe.
Sure.
Now, that doesn't happen all the time. So if it doesn't happen, what I talk to parents about is just begin to make sure that you feed your baby. If they get drowsy, all babies get drowsy right when they're being nursed or bottle fed.
Right.
You would wake them up in some fashion, change their diaper, take them away from the breast or bottle, walk around the room and say good night to things in the room, or happy nap time to things in the room. Put them in the crib and let them again self-soothe or self-settle. And there's a temperament issue here. Some children do really well with what they call check and console. So it isn't full cry it out. You stay nearby. You try not to take them out. You try not to rock them or give them more parental assistance, if you will. But you stay nearby and maybe you rub their back. Maybe you talk to them softly and you say, I'm here. You can do it. You can fall asleep. That sort of thing. Some children, though, do worse with that. They get more upset if you're there and not picking them up. And those kids do better if you put them fed and dry, well-loved into the crib, and then you leave them to learn how to do it themselves without you nearby. So it's really a temperament thing. Some children do beautifully with the check and console, and some children really need that step where the parent leaves completely. And of course, you're never going to shut the door and never come back. You're usually observing and listening and that sort of thing. So there is a temperament to it. And there is also an age issue, right? You wouldn't want to sleep train any baby really before 4 to 6 months. Sleep cycles haven't really organized themselves.
Sure.
My own preference is fully 6 months old. A child who's developing normally by 6 months old doesn't have a physiological need to eat during the night, but they may have a learned need to eat during the night. So I would recommend sleep training from about the 6 month mark on, and usually you'll get a couple of years out of that the way you did, right? And then at about 18 months to 2 years, there's usually an issue where they've made a transition out of the crib or they've made a little developmental leap and they figure out, wow, I figured out a way to have my mom or dad stick around. I really like this. And then you might have to, quote, sleep train again. So that's why I wrote my book. My book is aimed at kids 3 to 10 because that's a trickier proposition when they can talk and walk and escape the room. That's a little trickier to do than sleep training, let's say, a 6 month old.
I love your wording of escape the room. That is so true. So spot on. Little criminals we have.
Oh, I call them ninjas too because they'll show up in your bed in the middle of the night. You don't even know. They're in there. They're ninjas.
Nope. They're just like up here. Oh my gosh. Well, I don't want to run out of time before we talk about this because I think it's such a critical age that your book focuses on, that 3 to 10. I have a 5-year-old myself who's never been a great sleeper either, but different reasons. Talk to me about all that's going on for kids kind of in that age range and, what are some of the typical sleep problems that you're seeing there and what to do about it?
Sure. So let's move to your 5-year-old for a moment. You could use a really similar bedtime routine that you use for Landon, where you sit with your 5-year-old and what's your 5-year-old daughter's? Is it a daughter?
Parker.
Parker.
Girl.
Got it. Parker. So for your 5-year-old, Parker, what you could do, for example, is you could have a lovely bedtime routine with Parker and you could read 2 books with her. And then you could say, now, Parker, you've got your reading light and your stack of books or your drawing pad or your puzzle books or whatever she might like. And you can say, I'm going to go do my work and you can read or draw until you're sleepy. And I can't wait to see you in the morning and I love you and good night. And then you could let Parker self-soothe with a book or a drawing pad or anything else. And then she can gauge, when am I drowsy enough to fall asleep? Just the way we do, right? We often get in bed with a book.
At that age,
some nights we read 1 page, right? Some nights we read 3 chapters. So you can teach her from an early age to do that, which leads me into a little more in-depth in the question you just asked. What happens in the age range that I'm addressing in my book is they begin to have to sleep elsewhere. they begin to have the opportunities to sleep at a sleepover, birthday party, or summer camp, or grandma's house when mom and dad have a little getaway. And if they only can fall asleep with a parent nearby or helping, then that becomes problematic, and they can't necessarily do the age-appropriate things that their friends are doing.
Right.
And in psychology, we call that a social cost, right? So they're the ones who have to sit that out, which is a shame. So again, that's why I always end my bedtime routine with the child in bed with something to do, whatever that looks like. For a 2-year-old, that's different than Parker, a 5-year-old, and they have something to do. And the reason I rely so heavily on a book and a book light is those are portable. Those can go to Parker's friend's house for a sleepover, or grandma's house, or summer camp, right? And she can have this cool little light. Sometimes I'll have parents purchase those little headlamp reading lights.
Right.
And wherever Parker goes, she can take her fun little headlamp and her book. And who cares if she's the last one awake at a sleepover, which is what they are afraid of, right?
Right.
Or summer camp with weird sounds outside the cabin window. She can just read. She can read herself to sleep, and that's such a life skill. And no matter where she goes, she can take that with her.
I love that. I absolutely love that. This is such a critical age for them in terms of having to be awake and alert during the day and having healthy sleep and things like that. I just, let me ask you about this, because this is something I know Richard has talked a lot about. As far as chronotypes, I've always just considered her a night owl, just like my husband. I'm a morning person. I could fall asleep by 8 if I wanted to. Does that play into how kids in that age range, or let me rephrase that. When does that start to come in, if at all, how children sleep?
So you're absolutely right. People have preferences. We call them owls or larks, just what it sounds like. People who like to be up at night, people who like to be up early in the morning. Kids do have that. I would say younger children, for the most part, are pretty good sleepers. They can usually fall asleep, 7:30, 8:30, and they typically wake up around, 6, 7 in the morning until puberty hits. And then melatonin that your body makes, not the kind that you could take, but the kind that your body makes, is released later at night. And so teenagers really do have a hard time biologically falling asleep at an early enough time to get enough sleep for a school day. They really might not have the sense of drowsiness until much later, 10, 11, 12, 1, and then they have a hard time falling asleep and therefore a hard time getting up.
What do you recommend, without giving it all away, what do you recommend for parents and for children, especially the older ones kind of in that puberty range? Are there things, I can't imagine my nieces or nephews at, 13 or 11, whatever, saying, okay, here's some books and some, paper, write yourself to sleep. For one, because they're a little more defiant, and two, that might not be as engaging.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So for teenagers, what I try to do is, teenagers are very savvy about their devices. So first of all, they do need to turn the blue light off, which is the end of the spectrum of light that is more wakeful. It promotes wakefulness, makes your brain think that it's daytime. So all the teenagers that I work with in the sleep center, they already know to use the night shift setting on their phones. They usually already have that. Yeah, they usually already have that set. Their parent won't know what I'm talking about, but the child will absolutely already know and will already have it. We'll already have it turned on. So number one, they should be having the blue light part of the spectrum pulled out of their devices, really from dinner time on. Even if they're doing homework, they could have the blue light turned off.
Okay.
Yep. And then what I do with teenagers when I ask them to try to fall asleep a little bit earlier, so I will have them go to bed at the appropriate time, knowing that they might take a little time to fall asleep, and I will see if they're willing to read a book. But you're correct that very few now are readers. So sad. So then what I'll do, because I don't really want them to have their phones, if you think about it, the phone is like having the world in your hand, right? Mm-hmm. Every movie ever made, every kind of game, every friend you've ever known, you could interact or use or play with on your phone. So I will say to them, if they really, really don't like to read, there is something that we all have tucked away in a closet somewhere, gathering dust, and it's a DVD player. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. All they do is play a movie. They don't need Wi-Fi. They don't have messaging or notifications. You just put a little movie in, a little DVD, and it has a little screen that's, let's face it, not very great quality probably, but they could watch a movie. A teenager could watch a movie on this device until they're drowsy if they really, really don't like to read. That's what I usually offer, because I would like to get their laptop and their tablet and their phone out of the room, set them up with a regular old alarm clock, maybe a movie player or a book. Some kids like to draw. Some teenagers like to draw. They do really love to draw. They could do that. Yep. And then the last trick is on the weekends. I try to have their parents help them get up no later than 2 hours past school day rise time. We call it school plus 2. So let's say they had to get up at 6:45 on the school day. They might try to get up by 8:45 or 9 on the weekends. That's hard, very hard. Most teenagers don't want to do that. So then I encourage the parent to try to make sure something kind of fun maybe happens around 9 o'clock in the morning. Maybe they all got to breakfast. Maybe they have a friend who, is a bit of an early bird who comes over to hang out with them. But you're just trying not to have them get up at 6 a.m. and then get up at noon. 6 a.m. and noon is a long way apart, 6 hours. And that's hard on your circadian rhythm. It's hard on your brain clock, so to speak.
Sure. Especially when you only have 2 days of it and then it's back to the grind.
Yes, your brain can't figure out what you want, right? It's almost like you went to Hawaii for the weekend every weekend, so to speak. So it's hard. It's harder. And then, of course, no long napping after school, ideally. Just those sorts of things. Small changes can make a difference.
Well, I would love to in my pocket forever. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. But I won't keep you. I know you have real patience to get to. But one thing I would love to ask for, and I guarantee you there's probably every listener out there has thought it, wondered it, looked it up. And there's, again, the research is all across the board. How much sleep should a toddler be looking to get? School age, young, 5 and up. And then the teenagers, ideally, if in a perfect world, how much sleep do we need?
Yes. So I'm going to answer your question, but I'm also going to point you to a fantastic resource, which is called the National Sleep Foundation. And they have a fantastic website with this really great chart. And the reason I love the chart is that it shows the ranges, because there are ranges as there are for adults, right? Some adults can get by on as little as 5 hours of sleep. Some adults need 9 hours of sleep. Most of us need 7 or 8 hours, right?
Right.
So now I'm going to work my way down. Teenagers actually need about 9 hours. Almost none of them are getting it. But that's what they need, says the research. And then, let's see, middle school and elementary kids, you're wanting to get into that, 9 to 10 hour range for them. And then really young ones, it really ranges. It can range from 12 to 14 hours. I'm sure you have friends whose kids sleep 7 to 7, and then they take a nap too. But the reason I love the chart on the National Sleep Foundation website is that it shows the maximum sleep that child might get, the minimum sleep that they could do quite well on, and then the average.
Okay. It makes you not feel quite so alone.
Yes, and it shows it for every age range, babies all the way up to adults.
Love that. Okay, that's very, very helpful, because like I said, I think a lot of us feel like we're out there on no man's island at 2 a.m. on their kid's floor, when in reality that might not be. We may not be alone.
No, you are certainly not alone. You're certainly not alone. And your daughter, if she turns out to be something called a short sleeper, that means someone who just needs a little bit less sleep than the average bear. There are kids who are like that, but you're not really going to know that until she holds the reins herself, right? Until she can put herself completely to sleep and put herself completely back to sleep. And then you're going to know, wow, this is how much sleep she's capable of achieving, because she has complete control of it herself.
Real quick, just as soon as you said that, I'm thinking that's kind of me. I've always been that way. I just operate very well on very little sleep, but I try and make sure it's quality sleep. How much does genetics play into how our kids are sleeping, if at all?
Yeah, quite a lot. Many sleep disorders, I'll use that word, disorders, or preferences, that's another word, run in families. So if someone's father and grandfather had sleep apnea, they really might have the anatomy that leads them to have sleep apnea. And many people will say to me, oh, my mom had insomnia and her mom had insomnia and I have insomnia. Now, in terms of sleep, almost all sleep problems can be improved. Almost every single one. Sleep apnea certainly can be.
Sure.
Insomnia certainly can be. So you can learn how to be a great sleeper. It's a skill. You can learn it and get better at it and perfect it.
Well, that gives a lot of people hope. I really think so, Lynelle. I mean, sleep it seems like such a simple thing, but it's just so important. The more you know about it, the more it's like there's so many components that go into it. And I am just over the moon and excited to read your book, Become Your Child's Sleep Coach, The Bedtime Doctor's 5-Step Guide, 3 to 10. Lynelle, where is the book available?
Yeah, so Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold, it's available.
I know I am ordering my copy now. And in addition to that, I would love to have you come back and talk a little bit more to us. I mean, like I said, I could keep you here for hours. But I'd love to talk more about some more sleep problems that affect both children as well as adults, and kind of go back to maybe some of the things that you talked to us about first in the cognitive behavioral therapy models and things like that. There's just an unending, Let me ask you this last question, because you are a sleep expert, I'm going to call you. Mm-hmm. How do you
I always hate to say this, but I'm a fabulous sleeper.
That's amazing. You should be proud, brag.
I feel slightly guilty. I'm a really good sleeper. And I value my sleep. I treasure it. I treasure it. And a lot of people think it's a mark of honor to be able to hardly sleep or get by on a little bit of sleep. That's not how I look at it. I look at it as a really important foundation to health. So I really value it and protect it.
It sure is. Lynelle, thank you so much. I'm so excited to try these techniques out tonight. I will know how they go. And
thank you, please.
I mean, I couldn't tell you how grateful I am for this conversation today. It was really helpful, and I'm sure our listeners will definitely be getting some things out of it too. So
thank you. It was a pleasure.
For our listeners, again, this was an awesome talk with Dr. Lynelle Schneeberg. Thank you. Please come again, and we will chat soon.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much again. I really do appreciate this. This was really good, and I totally will let you know how this goes. I'm very excited.
I wish you would. You have my email, and I really mean it.
I sure do. I will. I'll give it a few weeks and see how we're doing, but I feel like the night terrors will be solved from the first co-sleeping issues.
I think probably so. She'll have a few here and there, but way, way fewer. And don't wait several weeks. Try it for about a week, and then email me and tell me if there are any curveballs that she threw or any ways that she outsmarted us. Let me know. I really mean it. I really mean it.
That. You are
so
just
do it.
I'm
here for you. Yeah. Okay, great.
Thanks, Lynelle. Chat soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye. You. Have a great day.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.